These notes about line graphs go with this document that you can get from Canvas, so make sure you have this open as you watch this video, and you can always pause if you need to fill in the doc. Alright, so making a line graph. So we went over bar graphs, now we have line graphs, and graphs are incredibly important to scientists. Use them all the time to help show data and to help people understand what it is that your data says, because just looking at a table often doesn't create an image for people. So line graphs we use when we show something changing over time. So time is a very important factor in a line graph. Here, this is a graph of the minimum wage. When they started it in 1938, you could make 25 cents an hour, and that was the minimum, and everyone had to be paid that. And you can see that over time it has increased, and the line graph helps us to see that change, to help us to visualize that change. And so this graph only stops in 1997, but this helps us to see the data. That's what a graph is for. So then you have a section here for parts of the graph. So you have a title, you have the line, or you might have multiple lines depending on what kind of graph it is. You have an x-axis. You have an x-axis scale. So what are we counting by? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're counting by ones. You have an x-axis label. This is usually some measurement of time, like a day is a measurement of time. You have the y-axis. You have a y-axis scale. You can see we go 0, 20, 40, 60, 80. So we're counting by 20s. And then you have the y-axis label. These are all the parts of a graph that you need to include if you want full credit on your graphs. So the x and y axis, your independent variable, remember that is the thing about the experiment you are modifying, that goes on the x-axis. Your independent variable is usually going to be time on the x-axis, and then whatever is changing over time, that's your dependent variable, that's going to go on the y-axis. The independent variable is whatever is causing the change. So whatever we did to cause the change, that goes on the x-axis. So this is asking what goes on the y-axis. You have hour and you have temperature. So you're looking at how does the temperature change over time. And so the y-axis then would be the temperature one. Temperature would go on the y-axis, hour would go on the x-axis, because remember the measurement of time usually goes on the x-axis, and whatever is changing over time goes on the y-axis. So what about this one? What goes on the x-axis? So if you thought or said days, that is correct. Days would go on the x-axis here, and ticket sales would go on the y. What about this one? So if you thought or said seconds, that would be correct. That goes on the x-axis, circumference would go on the y. What about this one? So if you thought or said age in months, that would be correct. This goes on the x-axis. Mass would be what goes on the y-axis. So setting up a line graph, you're going to first label your x and y axis, decide what goes on the x, what goes on the y, and then you have to come up with scale. You'll see that in a later assignment here. How do we figure out scale? So deciding on a scale, you have to meet some characteristics. You do not have to start at 0. You do have to go from your lowest and highest data points. You do have to have an interval that fits your data points, and you do have to take up at least 75% of the space on a graph. Setting up a line graph, so you're going to draw in the dots. So look for where the coordinates come together, put a dot there. Do all the dots first, then you go back and connect them. This is less of a problem on the computer because the computer does that automatically, but if you were graphing in person, do your dots first and then connect from left to right. And then don't forget the title, because people often lose points for forgetting the title. And then the last part of this notes is to answer these questions. You have a copy of this graph on the last page of the Google Doc, and then you're going to look at that and to answer these questions here, and then please submit that to Canvas.